So our first session this morning will talk about Ovarian Cancer Canada's exciting 5-year research initiative aimed at bringing the best new treatment to women living with ovarian cancer. I would now like to introduce our first session, OvCAN, Advancing New Treatments to Improve the Survival of Women with Ovarian Cancer. Please join me now in welcoming Elisabeth Baugh, CEO of Ovarian Cancer Canada, Donna Pepin, Patient Advisor, and Dr. Bart Vanderhyden, Chair of the OvCAN Governing Council. Elisabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's really exciting to be able to tell you today about this wonderful initiative and how quickly it's moving forward. The pandemic has caused many health charities to shut down a lot of their programs. And fortunately for Ovarian Cancer Canada, exactly the opposite is happening for us in terms of research. So this morning, we are going to talk about the OvCAN project, advancing new treatments to improve the survival of women with ovarian cancer. As Stephanie said, we'll have 3 presenters and look forward to hearing from all of them over the next hour. The mission of Ovarian Cancer Canada is to champion the health and well-being of women with ovarian cancer and others at risk of this disease while advancing research to save lives. We want to make sure that all women who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer have the chance to live fuller, better, and longer lives, as well as women who are at risk for it. There are 3 pillars of our mission, and the first one is research. And today, that's what we're going to tell you about, the OvCAN research program. There'll be 3 objectives today. How did we get there? What was the advocacy looking like? What is the OvCAN project? And how are we making sure that the patient voice is incorporated into all that we do, including this important research project? I'm going to turn it over to Donna to tell you how we got there. It was a marathon trip to advocate for this research funding. It was not a sprint, but we did get there, and so many voices helped us. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you, Elisabeth, and thank you, Stephanie, and good morning, everyone. My name is Donna Pepin, and today I'd like to tell you about my experiences on Parliament Hill as we lobbied our federal government for an investment in ovarian cancer research. But really, my story is about hope. It's about hope and the power of our voices. Like many of you who are here today, I am living with ovarian cancer. I was originally diagnosed and treated in 2006, and after that, I remained healthy for 9 years. I was diagnosed with the recurrence of my disease in 2016, and patient at Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto. And for those of you who are newly diagnosed with ovarian cancer, I hope that knowing I'm still here, living well after 14 years, gives you hope. And speaking of hope, I'd like to acknowledge that we all have different hopes. For example, when we are newly diagnosed, perhaps we are hoping for a cure, and hope is what gets us through our initial treatment. When our disease recurs, our hope might change, and perhaps we hope for remission. When our disease progresses, our hope can change again. Maybe we hope for the goal of a special trip or a special occasion, or it could be that we simply hope for feeling better, not to suffer, and to live every day, fully appreciating each moment. Hope changes. It's a journey and it's different for everyone. And hope helps us all to cope with our disease every day. I've been advocating for ovarian cancer for 12 years. Why? Because my hope is activated when I have opportunities to educate the public and medical professionals about our disease. But most importantly, my hope is activated by supporting Ovarian Cancer Canada's efforts to change outcomes and save women's lives by funding clinical trials. And so in 2017, When Ovarian Cancer Canada asked if I was interested in speaking to people in government about investing in ovarian cancer research, I jumped at the chance. It was an opportunity to speak not only for myself, but for every woman I knew with ovarian cancer and for all of the women we have lost to this disease. When I think about different kinds of hope, I think that Ovarian Cancer Canada had audacious hope. When they took action towards a goal that had never before been achieved in Canada, federal funding for ovarian cancer research. In Ottawa, our delegations consisted of multiple teams. Each team of 3 was made up of an OCC staff, a research physician, and a woman who was living with ovarian cancer. Next slide. In 2015, in 2016, in 2017, and 2018, we remained hopeful that our $10 million goal could be achieved, despite the fact that many of the 47 patient delegates who had gone to Ottawa had lost their lives to ovarian cancer. We had the audacity to keep going back. 2017 was my first visit to Ottawa, and I remember so well the feeling we all had as we walked away from Parliament Hill that day. Members of Parliament and the Federal Minister of Health all seemed so receptive to our urgent message that day. I felt a connection, I felt heard, and I felt that members of Parliament cared and they sincerely wanted to help us. But in 2017, we didn't get our funding. Fast forward to 2018, and I returned to Ottawa with quite a different mindset than the year before. In 2018, I knew far too many women who were sick, struggling, and unfortunately dying of ovarian cancer, and I was facing no new options with my own treatment. I was no longer starstruck. Instead, I was fired with determination and, to be honest, a little anger. And when I think back on our individual meetings, I was probably far too emotional as I relayed real-time stories of women I knew who were dealing with the hardships of advanced ovarian cancer. Now, I am not a beggar, but that day, I think I was. When I told the story of someone I knew who was facing her 7th surgery for ovarian cancer, I asked the Member of Parliament, "Can you help this woman, please? Because she's running out of time. She might not make it." And I also asked them, "Can you help me?" And I'll never forget what one senior elected official told me that day. He said, "No matter what happens, remember that your voice, the voice of lived experience, is the loudest. Your voice has more power than anyone's. Your stories will be remembered. Keep telling them. And if you have to, keep coming back." And so we continued that day with our message of urgency, our plea for help. Please help us. Help us save lives. Help us to change the outcomes of this disease. We need medical research. And this had been our message for 4 years. Next slide. Just think about the collective power of our voices. More than 12,000 petitions signed, more than 4,000 letters written to elected officials, the thousands of postcards that our community distributed that said, "It's about time for ovarian cancer research." This is the power of hope. Change slide. In 2019, Ovarian Cancer Canada was awarded a 5-year federal grant of $10 million. And OvCAN was born. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Baugh Vanderhyden, and it is my great pleasure to tell you more about OvCAN. I just have to contradict Donna only on one point in her saying that she was too emotional perhaps for those meetings, and I would argue that it was because of the emotional connection that she made with those MPs and other individuals in Parliament that is the primary reason why our pleas to the government were finally successful. And in that vein, I do want to thank everyone, not only Donna, but everyone who is involved in those advocacy days and those letters and those postcards. They made a difference. And I can't tell you as a scientist how exciting it is for me to finally see $10 million be dedicated to ovarian cancer research. For a long time, ovarian cancer research fell through the cracks, where ovarian cancer was not considered rare enough to access funds for rare diseases. We were not considered fatal enough, ironically, to get access to funds for research for fatal diseases, highly fatal diseases. So OvCAN gave us this opportunity, and I am thrilled to be able to tell you what we have done with this. Next slide, please. So the photo you see here is Elisabeth Baugh signing the agreement with Health Canada. And although the funds were announced in March 2019, it took almost a year for all the paperwork to be cleared so that the first installment of funds were finally transferred in February of this year. We started already last year to try to find partners, individuals and groups that could contribute to the support for OvCAN so that we could make a much bigger impact than the $10 million. We managed in the fall of 2019 to have an agreement with an organization called IRACOR. They are a Montreal-based Center of Excellence in Commercialization and Research, and they have a lot of practice in doing grants competitions. And so they agreed to do a grants competition, and not only that, they would contribute $2 million to the $2 million we had already set aside for that competition. So we now have $4 million. And as you've heard earlier from the premiers, the government of Nova Scotia made a really unexpected donation of $1 million to OvCAN in February of this year. And a month later, the government of Saskatchewan did the same thing. And I think Elisabeth was eager and ready to start contacting all the provinces and saying, look, if Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan can contribute $1 million each, you need to be able to do this as well. But of course, March was when COVID hit, and it was a bad time to start asking governments for money when other healthcare issues took priority. But by March 2020, we had garnered $4 million in additional donations. And so we were now at $14 million that we're having a blast prioritizing and spending on various research endeavors. Next slide, please. So the first thing that had to happen is I do chair the Research Committee of Ovarian Cancer Canada. However, this is much bigger than anything that the Ovarian Cancer Canada had done before. And so we needed to have a governing council that had representation from all different corners of the field. So Elisabeth Baugh, as CEO of Ovarian Cancer Canada, is on that committee. I chair the governing council. There's a former chair of the board of directors. Donna, who you just heard, is on that governing council. And then the rest of the people are largely oncologists, pathologists, scientists, individuals who've had a focused career on ovarian cancer. We have representation from the Society of Gynecologic Cancer. That's Helen Mackay, Dr. Helen Mackay. At the very bottom of the list, but certainly not least, with these funds, we were able to hire a program manager, Alicia Tone. Because there's so many activities and so much going on, it requires a high level of coordination. And Alicia Tone happens to be the most organized person on the planet. So we have been very lucky to have her as our program manager. Next slide, please. So we have established 3 priorities, and these are not priorities we established this year. These are actually 3 priorities that were established almost 6 years ago. I sent out a survey to everyone in Canada who did research of any kind in ovarian cancer, be it clinical or basic or translational. And I said, if we had $10 million, what could we do that would have the most impact on women who are living with ovarian cancer? And got lots and lots of replies. And so what we did, we took the majority of those ideas and funneled them into 3 prominent goals. One was research models, and these are the models that are necessary to test new treatments. The second are novel treatments, and that was to take advantage of the wealth of discoveries that had been made in Canada, but had not yet been put through the preclinical trials that would get them into clinical trials. And the third, of course, were the clinical trials themselves. And so those 3 priorities collectively would allow us, we thought and hoped, and still do hope, will improve the outcomes of women who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Next slide. So I'll go through each of those 3 priorities in turn. We've spent most of the effort so far on priority 1, because it was something we could do during 2019 before the money came through. Then it would require a lot of planning, and so we started with that. And so again, this priority is to find the best research models for ovarian cancer. Now, what is a research model and why do we need it? Well, we are not allowed to take our best discoveries and immediately start treating patients with it. They have to be shown to be to work, and they have to be shown to be safe. And for that, we need to have research models to do that kind of research. And so what you see in the picture that says surgical tissue, the easiest way is to have tissue that was being removed from a woman who has ovarian cancer. And in this case, you see in the diagram, in the photo, that it's being embedded within wax. And from that, it can be used for various purposes. But you can also take a piece of that tumor tissue and put it into a plastic dish, which you see below, called tissue type-specific cell line. And those cancer cells will grow. And this is the easiest way to allow the testing of novel treatments just by putting that treatment into the dish. You can also, instead of putting it in a dish, put it into what's called a 3-dimensional culture, those organoids. So you can take a piece of tissue and put it into a dish, but not allow it to stick. And so it floats in suspension. It's called ex vivo. And all those little bubbles that you see under organoids are all little tiny blocks or pieces of ovarian tumor. And one of the other options you can do is called patient-derived xenograft. And that is to take some of the tumor tissue that has been removed from a patient and put it into a mouse. And that tumor will grow in the mouse. And when it gets big enough, you can retrieve it, break it into smaller tumors, put it into multiple mice, and let it grow in multiple mice. And soon you'll have a whole collection of mice that are developing identical tumors that originally came from a single patient. And then you can treat those mice with your experimental treatment to see which ones are likely to work, not only in the mice, but ideally back in the patient. So these are just 4 examples, but there are a lot of different kinds of models. And what we needed to do was find what kind of models do we have in Canada, which ones are the best, and which ones do we need to know more about in order to make them more useful. Next slide, please. So that was our goal. And we questioned how we do this because we didn't want the Canadian research community to compete. We wanted all the best ideas, all the best heads at the table discussing the merits of these models and decide what's best and what's not so good. And so we decided we will have this consortium of ovarian cancer researchers, all of who have expertise in model development or validation, and then have them put their heads together and work in a collaborative process. We're not competing. We're going to work together to identify what models exist, make a catalog, and then identify where are the gaps that we need to be filled in. Next slide. So that's what we did. Last year, we sent an email out to everyone in the ovarian cancer research community and said, okay, give us this information. They had a big questionnaire they needed to fill out. And there were 3 key findings from that survey. The first one on the lower left, that histogram of all the multiple colors, that actually told us that there are more than 80 model systems already present within Canadian resources. So we have cell lines, we have 3D cultures, we have the xenograph models, they're all over the place, and they are all across Canada, and there's all different kinds of them. So we already had a pretty good start just by doing the inventory to know what we had. Then in the first circle, you see we asked everyone who had models, would they be willing to share them with any other researcher in Canada? And 56 people said yes. And then we said, okay, are you willing to work in a community-based endeavor, community working together to decide where we should spend this money? And 52 of those people said yes. And so we started with a group of 52 individuals who all had expertise in model development in ovarian cancer. Next slide. And away we went. So we called ourselves the OvCAN Models Consortium, and we're divided into 3 working groups. And the 3 working groups each took responsibility for one category of model systems, either cell lines or the ex vivo model, or those organoids, or the mouse models, or what we call in vivo models. And so those working groups worked extensively, sometimes having monthly meetings for a long period of time to try to prioritize, okay, what needs to be done in order to improve these models that we have, or do we need to make new ones? And to date, we have funded 16 different projects, which I think is remarkable if you think that there are 52 people sitting at the table and collectively they've decided to fund 16 projects. So people are participating without any personal gain. That's fine, you can advance. And so the goal of this now is to try to fill these gaps. So we have cell culture models with check marks across all the different subtypes that we know, the high-grade serous, clear cell carcinomas, low-grade serous, small cell carcinomas. So we have cell line models for almost all of them except granulosa cell tumors. What we don't have are those mouse models that we can use for testing new treatments. And so a lot of the money that has been contributed to Priority 1 has been to fill these gaps in cell lines, but also particularly in the mouse models. Next slide. So Priority 1 has gone exceedingly well. We have a huge inventory of what's available, and we're going to fill the gaps over the next year or so for the models that we don't yet have fully characterized. And that allowed us to move on to Priority 2. And this is an important one because we do have a really wonderful body of individuals across Canada who study ovarian cancer and who make discoveries all the time identifying possible treatments. But rarely can we get the funds to move those discoveries through what's called the preclinical phase, through the research that's necessary before it can be entered into a clinical trial. So OvCAN funding allows us to identify and prioritize, we think probably up to 8 novel treatments and get them through the preclinical testing phase. And so we want to prioritize them based on the data that already exists for them and the probability that they will be effective. And secondly, we want them to be able to get into clinical trials in the shortest possible time. And so those are 2 of the priorities we're giving to how do we fund novel treatments. And the only way to do this fairly was to do this in an open competition with grant applications. And that's what we did. We launched that opportunity. Next slide, please. So in partnership with IRACOR, we launched in February the Lead Action Ovarian Cancer Competition. And this was a grants competition that would allow us to ultimately spend the $2 million from OvCAN and the $2 million from IRACOR, so a total of $4 million to advance novel treatments through preclinical trials. We sent out a call for applications and we had 16 notices of intent from scientists across Canada. They came in March. And those notices tell us the ideas that those scientists have about what discovery research they would like to put through preclinical trials. We did an evaluation of those notices of intent and 11 met the criteria. And so we invited those 11 scientists to submit a full application, and 9 of them submitted an application at the end of August. I know one of those applicants who did not, unfortunately, is a young mom with 3 small kids and way too much on her plate to be able to do this during a pandemic. And unfortunately, I think that's a real shame. And I'm hoping there'll be another opportunity for us to get some of those better ideas on the table in the near future. But we did need an independent review panel, so individuals who were not connected in any way to the applicants. And so we had ovarian cancer researchers and oncologists, business experts, and patient representatives who all reviewed all these applications. And then on October 15th, they met virtually to discuss and to rank all the applications. And unfortunately, I can't announce the outcome because I don't know the outcome. The funding decisions won't be announced until early November. But I can tell you, next slide, that there are an interesting array of types of treatments that were included in this group of applications. And so, as one of my colleagues likes to say, Alicia says, you know, we didn't put all our eggs in one basket. So, which is good, because you don't want to have just a bulldozer to sort of treat a cancer and hope that it's going to be strong enough to plow down all those cancer cells. The opportunity to have multiple different kinds of cancer treatments means that we're moving more towards personalized medicine, where we can use the treatments that work best on the patient who's likely to respond the best. And so these treatments include targeted therapies, small compound inhibitors, such as bevacizumab is an example of that. So an inhibitor that blocks a specific protein that's present in the tumors or has a specific function in those tumors. But we were quite surprised to see how many groups had immune-based therapies in their portfolio. Lots of evidence to suggest that if we play with the immune system, if we boost a woman's immune system, we might get it to be more effective in killing the cancer cells. And there are so many ways this could be done, and you can see on the list here some of those ways that are being proposed as good strategies for ovarian cancer. And they include vaccines and antibodies and oncolytic viruses. And I'd love to be able to spend hours telling you about all of these, but maybe we can do this during the chat. There are immune stimulating nanoparticles, so one very sophisticated approach. CAR T cells, I don't know if you've heard about, but T cells are the cells that are supposed to kill your cancer cells or any foreign body that enters your body. But these T cells in a patient have either failed to recognize the cancer as foreign or have become exhausted trying to fight off this tumor. And so it's possible to take T cells from a patient, re-energize them, reinvigorate them, and then put them back into the woman and hope they do a better job of killing the cancer cells. So there's lots of different strategies here, and I don't know which ones will get supported in this first go round. So we'll have to wait and see in early November. It'll be on Ovarian Cancer Canada's website, I'm sure, as soon as it's announced. Next slide, please. So this is the one that I think many of you would probably be most interested in, is where are those early phase clinical trials? And so we put a lot of effort in the early stages to make sure that we would be ready to go with new clinical trials as quickly as possible. And the intent or the goal of these trials is to stratify ovarian cancer patients to these experimental medicines, in part based on the type of tumor, the kind of tumor they have, and the defining features of that tumor. And I'll describe that in a moment. But we gave priority to projects that include translational studies. And if you don't know what translational studies is, it's fairly simple. In a clinical trial, you give a new type of treatment to patients, and then you hope to see that the patients will respond to that treatment and improve. In some cases, the patients don't improve. And if you don't do translational studies, you'll never know why. Why did some patients respond and other patients did not? And so by taking tissue samples and blood samples from patients at every step along the course of treatment, you can examine those samples and then identify, why did this patient respond? How did they respond so well? And why did other patients not respond? So it's really important information to ensure that we keep moving forward and building on clinical trials that work. We wanted this to be national in scope. We wanted as many cancer patients across Canada to be able to access a clinical trial, and we wanted to build it on the Canadian science, because there's so many good ideas already here. And importantly, we really wanted to make sure patients were engaged in every aspect of the planning, and not only as patients in a clinical trial, but in the planning and organization of those trials. In the early stages, when we got the money, we thought we'd be able to fund maybe 4 to 5 early phase clinical trials with longitudinal profiling of samples from about 250 patients. So next slide. What I mean by that longitudinal profiling is, click please. In those blocks here, you see there's a patient, and then there's samples being taken at various times during their course of treatment, before and after surgery. Maybe if there's a recurrence, it can continue. And by treating these women in clinical trials, but at the same time collecting blood or tissue or ascites, we can analyze that tissue and determine why patients are responding or why they are not. Click again, please. So you can see here, if the patient has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, we can take a sample of the tumor, and it goes to what we call molecular profiling. So we look at the DNA, we look at the RNA, we look at the proteins, we look at the immune cells that are present in the tumor. We look at all the various components that are there. And then we put this into a computational modeling platform so that we can see, well, if this patient who always has a high level of protein X is almost always responding to this treatment, then maybe we should subcategorize patients so that any patient with protein X should be given this treatment. And on the bottom, you see the optimal therapeutic strategy. You can work that out in all those research models that we are developing in priority 1. And by doing this enough times, we'll be able to have much more important data and predictive data that will tell us if a patient has this particular protein, for example, this is the type of treatment that they should be getting that works most often in patients with that type of high level of protein. So that's personalized medicine, and that's why we need to do the longitudinal profiling to get us there. Click again, please. And so we have reevaluated how we're doing this, and we now estimate that we're going to be able to obtain 2,500 samples from 400 Canadian women with ovarian cancer. Next slide, please. And so what is our progress to date? Well, as I said, we planned a lot of this over the past year so that we could announce early in the year a call for applications for these clinical trials. And we received 14 of them in May. We had to bring in an international committee of scientific experts, in part because we wanted to have international recognition of the caliber of the work. But we also included on that panel 3 patient representatives because we needed the stakeholders at the table to make sure that these trials would meet their needs as well. And so the panel reviewed these applications based on the quality of the science, the impact of the research on patients, the relevance to the call, to the criteria that we had established, and the feasibility. Were they asking too much money for what we had available, or could they do the work with the money that they were asking for? That international committee with patient representatives established a priority list that they recommended to us, and the governing council looked at that priority list and said, okay, we have money to fund the top 4. So we now have 4 clinical trials, some starting this fall, some in January, that will be newly available to women with ovarian cancer. We spent just over half the money, so half of the $5 million we had set aside for clinical trials in this competition, and we'll spend the rest in a second competition that's going out with an application deadline of next spring. Next slide, please. So I don't have a lot of time to tell you all the details of the 4 trials that are going to be happening. They are summarized here, but there will be more information available on social media when those trials launch. The first one you see is a brand new combination. All of them involve PARP inhibitors. And if you aren't familiar, PARP inhibitors are probably the biggest advance in treatment of ovarian cancer that we've had in decades. Very exciting. Many patients respond. Some develop resistance. And so two of these trials is actually, what do we give to women who have developed a resistance to PARP inhibitor? But others are saying, well, maybe we can combine PARP inhibitor with something else. And one called New Sequence, the second one there, actually saying, well, we're now approved to give PARP inhibitor after surgery. Can we test it before surgery? Can we see whether that works even better than if we wait until after surgery? So we've invited 2 of the 4 leaders of these research trials, clinical trials, to talk to you. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll hear from the organizers of the ES2 trial.
The ES2 trial is based on a long-standing collaboration I've had with Diane Provencher over the last 30 years, and the inclusion of a new collaborator, a young researcher who brought new ideas to the team.
For any cancer medication or cancer chemotherapy to work, there is a phenomena that needs to be induced in cancer cells, which we term cell-fate decision. So these decisions can include simple cell death, which is the best thing that you want to get, or we can force these cells to sleep so they cannot divide anymore, which is also good because it prevents proliferation of these cancer cells. So our first discovery was that drugs like PARP inhibitors that are used in the clinic force the cells into this sleep state more than they really kill them. And the second discovery, which is probably the most important, is that we can force these sleeping cells to die using a new medication that we call senolytics. So this gives us a 1-2 punch strategy that will first force the cells to sleep and then turn these sleeping cells into dead cells. And we think this can improve the efficiency of the currently used cancer chemotherapy in the context of ovarian cancer.
So the ES2 trial is based on a Canadian discovery.
Thank you to allow us to do this ES2 study. ES2 combined two medications that are already on the market. First, an inhibitor of PARP that we are all aware, as well as a senolytic. This contributes to a strategy that is a 1-2 punch type to allow basically the cells to die once they've been hit the first time with the PARP inhibitor. What's the most important thing also about the study is patient will contribute tumor tissue as well as blood, and we will be able to follow in real time exactly what's going on with this medication.
Thank you, Ovarian Cancer Canada, for the support, and to all the women who contributed to our research.
Allez-vous-en. Okay.
So that describes briefly the ES2 trial.
The ES2 trial is based on a
Can we
long...
go on to the next slide, please? And this, and Dr. Stephanie Leroux will tell you about the REVOLVE trial.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Stephanie Leroux, a medical oncologist working at Princess Margaret, Toronto. On behalf of my team, I'm very delighted to be with you today and to give you a summary of the upcoming REVOLVE project. In ovarian cancer, the treatment landscape has completely changed recently with the avenue of PARP inhibitor treatment. PARP inhibitor treatment has shown some benefit for patients with ovarian cancer and BRCA1 and 2 mutation, but also for patients with ovarian cancer behaving like BRCA. However, when PARP inhibitor treatment stopped working to control cancer, we don't have a complete, clear, established treatment at the time of PARP inhibitor treatment resistance. We don't know which treatment will work best at that time. Our team has established a previous study showing that at the time of PARP inhibitor progression, there is different mechanism of resistance that can explain why PARP is no longer working. Importantly, each patient will have their own mechanism of resistance. What does it mean? It means that it's very important that for each patient, we know what is the mechanism of resistance. And we need to do that in a timely fashion to try to see how we can guide the treatment adapted for each woman. So our team will build this REVOLVE study to look at what is the mechanism of resistance of PARP inhibitor treatment in a real time. We'll offer women to have a biopsy, as we did before, but also a blood test to see if we can identify what is the mechanism of resistance in the blood. And this result will be then corrected with a tumor biopsy to ensure that our technique is working. We'll then try to use this information we had from the blood and with a different mechanism of resistance to see if we can guide the treatment and to see which one may work best at that time. This is a very innovative clinical trial that will be offered to our women. The occasion to really thank our women for the support that they give to us, and a specific thanks to Ovarian Cancer Canada, who made this study possible. And in this specific month of September of ovarian cancer awareness, I'm really delighted to be with you and really say that we are on your side. And I'm really looking forward to meet you again and to give you the report of our progress in this specific project. Thank you and see you soon.
So I just wanted to say that we are very excited by the opportunity to put new clinical trials onto the map for ovarian cancer patients. Although the primary source of those are in Montreal and Toronto, it should be noted that all of these, all but one, are able to be offered at many centers across Canada, which I think is incredibly important. The strongest trials being proposed at this time were for, 3 of them were for high-grade serous cancer, and particularly patients who are able to have PARP inhibitors because they have BRCA mutations. But the priority for the next round, the competition that I said would be announced in May, is to actually give support to let's say, emerging leaders in the clinical trial field, so younger investigators, but highest priority on trying to develop clinical trials for the less common subtypes. So I think we've done very well in addressing high-grade serous, which is the most common, but we're going to focus in the next competition on those who have the less common subtypes of ovarian cancer. And I just need to end by paying attention to the patient partners. We desperately wanted to ensure that the stakeholders were at the table at every step of the process for OvCAN development and administering the initiatives. And so we needed them to help us decide how to spend this money in ways that would benefit them most. And so we developed the Patient Partners in Research platform. Next slide, please. And so our goal was to have a team of trained patient partners who could help us make these decisions, who could enhance the quality of research by providing us with their insight and their experiences to ensure that what we were offering back to them was going to meet their needs. So patient in this context is either the woman herself who's living with ovarian cancer, but also family members, friends, caregivers, anyone who knows that woman or her circumstance as well. There are so many potential roles we've identified by patients, but I've given 3 examples here. They can participate in our research team meetings. They are definitely helpful in providing input on the potential barriers when we try to recruit women to join the clinical trials. And they've been helping developing or reviewing our patient education documents to make sure that they are understandable. We scientists like to speak language sometimes that's not always the easiest to follow. And I'm very pleased to say that we already have 16 active members from across the country. I'm hoping some of them are actually listening here, who have had already roles in various aspects of OvCAN activity. And importantly, I think it's the next stage I'm really looking forward to is to having those patients talk to the researchers, because I think we researchers need to be trained in how to incorporate patients more into our research in very meaningful and productive ways. So if you have an interest in this, you can contact Alicia Tone for more information. She's at ovcan@ovariancanada.org. Next slide. And I do need to emphasize we have incorporated patients wherever we thought there could be a role for them or where they might want to be involved, including having Donna as our patient representative on the OvCAN Governing Council. We've had patient partners on the 2 grant review panels for Priority 1 and for Priority 3. Patients have been there and have had a major role in helping us to evaluate those applications. And now with the clinical trials going on, we have at least 1 patient partner who's embedded into each research team for each trial. So they're there and we are so happy to have them. And I think that's it for me. We're back to you, Donna.
Thank you, Barb. I just think this is all so exciting. I love hearing all of this information. Both Ovarian Cancer Canada and OvCAN have recognized that patients are our greatest lobbyists. And because patients were so instrumental in securing funds from the federal government, OvCAN continues to prioritize meaningful engagements for patient partners. Personally, I am honored to have a role as patient advisor on the OvCAN Governing Council, and I'm also humbled to be a voice for ovarian cancer patients in Canada. As a patient myself, it's exciting to realize the power of the patient voice, to know we are helping and that we are not helpless. For example, in our most recent grant review process, patient partners worked alongside a committee of international scientific experts to determine the final rankings for clinical trial submissions. Patient partners on this grant review board had an equal vote. Again, our voices matter. As patient partners, we have an opportunity to tell both researchers and physicians what is needed to best support cancer health services and policy research going forward. We all know there are so many aspects of the cancer pathway that need improvement. We all know our medical system lags in coming to access new therapies and drugs with good efficacy and low side effects. Patient partners can help identify and define what our priorities are for new drugs, Only a patient can inform how to improve or how to enhance the patient experience. Research needs input as to how patients perceive clinical trials and clinical trial outcomes. Fun fact, I have learned that it's actually a challenge for researchers to recruit patient partners. So they really appreciate that Ovarian Cancer Canada is connecting them to patients. We are setting them up for success. Patient partners have opportunities for education. It's a chance to gain both an in-depth understanding of the research process and the challenges that researchers face. Personally, I have gained an incredible insight into my own past treatments and like how I was medically treated, the standards of care, and how I can possibly be treated in the future. And this has been another source of hope for me. Patient partners can inform recruitment options and help researchers to identify the barriers to patients and what can enable patients. There is tremendous value in presenting your cancer experience to a research team. Your story can both inspire them and ground them. Researchers hardly ever have opportunities for patient contact. They're working in a laboratory. Despite the fact that I was initially very intimidated at the idea of sitting on a governing council with some of the top medical minds in Canada, I've loved every minute of it. I've really enjoyed the opportunities for learning, and I have loved collaborating with amazing people. I don't have a medical degree, but I've learned that only a patient can teach medicine how to effectively sustain and enhance the cancer system so that patient experiences and outcomes can be improved. And let's not forget that advocating isn't just for the public or for the government. You need to advocate for your own care, and that includes asking for clinical trials. And I think we all know that the only way statistics around ovarian cancer can change is through medical research. I hope, and I really do believe, that the OvCAN project will finally change the face of ovarian cancer in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. We now still have time. I think we still have about 15 minutes for questions, and we do have a lot of questions. Barb, the first one coming in, is there any research being done for treatment of patients without BRCA mutation? Now, we did have a few around that, so if you could address that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was no prioritization of any kind of subtype in any of the research strategies that we developed, a priority 1, 2, or 3. What we did was we asked the community to put forth their ideas for the clinical trials on any type of cancer. So I think one of those trials that's approved is for any type of ovarian cancer. PARP was focused on only because those were the strongest applications, and right now we have the most opportunity to benefit more women by focusing on PARP inhibitors. But PARP inhibitors aren't limited exclusively to BRCA mutation carriers. I gave that as an example, but there are a lot of mutations that are present in high-grade serous cancer, and we're finding more and more that are allowing women to be on PARP inhibitors than we thought previously, because that mutational load that is present in high-grade serous cancers actually makes them very responsive to PARP inhibitors. So our key in some of the earlier work was to see how many patients can we identify that have potentially a good response to PARP inhibitors, because that we can roll out right away. We've got PARP inhibitors improved. Let's try to expand the population of women who can take PARP inhibitors and benefit from it. when it came to our clinical trials, we have 3 that are limited to high-grade serous and PARP inhibitor, either resistance or combinations. But as I said, the second round of the competition is going to be focused on all other subtypes. I think we've done what we can for high-grade serous. Now we need to focus on all the other subtypes. And even in the priority 2 projects, they were not all focused on high grade. We don't know which ones are funded, but I know for a fact, because I know about 3 of them, that they were not specifically focused on any type or subtype of ovarian cancer. And the reason I know that a lot of them probably were not that kind of focus is because they were working on optimizing the immune response. And the immune response does not necessarily link to any particular mutation. It talks about the immune system of the individual, and it doesn't rely on mutations that are present in the tumor, be they BRCA or any other type. So we are paying attention to the things that we can get an early grab on and push those forward as quickly as we can. And the things that are harder and where we have to put more effort into making those discoveries, that is going to be in the phase that will come through in the competition next May.
Thank you, Barb. So another question here is, will any of this research impact somebody already diagnosed, or will these discoveries take decades to come to patients?
So the clinical trials are starting now. We have 1 that's already started, I think 2 that are starting this fall, and 1 that's starting in January. So the whole point of this is to have patients who are diagnosed already have benefit of being able to be included in some of these clinical trials. That was the goal. Is we want more patients in clinical trials and as many across country as can be managed. So we're trying to make this benefit patients now. Of course, the outcomes of those trials will hopefully benefit patients for years to come.
Excellent. I've had a couple questions here, Barb, around screening. Is there any research being done in screening? It seems that so many ovarian cancer patients do not get diagnosed until the cancer is quite advanced.
Yeah, that's a tough one. When we did the call out to the community, the research community years ago, there were, I think, 2 suggestions that we need to focus on prevention or screening. The problem is when we put that call out, we had just, not we, but the world had just completed 2 major trials on early detection that have both failed. So one was done in the UK and one was done in the US. And there were more than 200,000 women who were monitored carefully annually for various, well, in both trials, it was CA-125 and a transvaginal ultrasound in an attempt to see how frequently or what combination or what parameters could you use to make them better at early detection. And although a few more women were detected with this one of the strategies, unfortunately, the overall survival of any of these women in any of these trials were not different. It didn't matter when you picked it up, the outcome was the same. And so that was these were large studies and far more expensive than Canada could ever have mounted. But it did tell us that the strategies that we thought would be most likely to work in early detection don't work. And so there's still work going on, but they're done by very small groups across Canada. And while early detection should improve outcome, we have no evidence that that's the case yet. So what we wanted to do was do something we knew would improve the outcomes of women who are diagnosed. I would love to have another $10 million to do early detection and prevention research. If anybody has any connection to anybody who's got money, we're happy to do more. But we had to stay focused on what we could do with the money that we have.
Of course, we're going to keep advocating for that extra 10 million too. I have a couple questions here, and this is a question I always get, I get asked a lot as well. Are there any researchers or research projects looking at working with integrative, somebody asked one, so it scrolled up on me. Working with integrative physicians to see if complementary medicines would be included alongside standard treatments?
So I think because in ovarian cancer, we have not had a lot of good novel treatments that have been effective over the time, except for recently with the addition of bevacizumab and olaparib. we've been able to have better treatments. And now those kind of studies could be done. Historically, everyone was treated the same way with surgery and chemotherapy, and there wasn't a lot of work to show that any complementary or integrative alternative therapies were helping that, because we sort of understood what chemo could do. But now we're in a phase where absolutely we're having new treatments with new kinds of patients, and we have no idea what the complementary therapies might do. So none of the projects that were proposed specifically studied that, but all of the projects that were proposed included that in the kind of information they would collect. So if a woman happens to be taking some of these complementary therapies, then it would be good for us to know about it, so we can build that into, you know, how that might impact the efficacy of the treatment that she's taking. So it's not a prior, it hasn't been built in as the main focus, but it's certainly built into the design of the trials.
Another question here from Catherine. Are PARP inhibitors licensed for use in Canada for ovarian cancer, and under what circumstances, or still only in clinical trials?
No, we have, olaparib was approved in 2018, more than 2 years ago. And I do know that Ovarian Cancer Canada has been working very hard at pushing for others. So there, I don't know, did niraparib get approved by PCODER? I think niraparib might have got approved, which is another PARP inhibitor, just a month ago. The provinces are still having to work out who's going to pay for it, but it's been approved. So we do have one that's been around for 2 years. And so we do have women in Canada who have been on it for longer than that, because the company that made it was actually providing the drug for free to those women. But now that it's been approved, there have been women that are largely taking it after surgery as a maintenance therapy. So trying to prevent recurrence. So they take it often in combination with bevacizumab, and so they stay on that combination until the cancer recurs. And the benefit of olaparib is that recurrence sometimes never happens. And sometimes if it does happen, it happens much later than originally that would have happened without that treatment. And the really interesting thing is that although it was approved because it prolongs that progression-free survival, that time to recurrence, there is new data that's just come out within the last few weeks that would suggest that it's going to provide an improvement in overall survival as well, meaning those women might never have their cancers recur, which I think is extremely exciting.
Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? And yes, Kaylee did just put in here, yes, niraparib was approved last month.
Okay.
I have another question here now. This is about involvement in the patient partner program. Can this program include speaking with family members of loved ones who have passed from ovarian cancer?
So that is something that Ovarian Cancer Canada sort of has as part of its portfolio, is patient support and support of their family members. The patient engagement and research aspect, that's part of OvCAN, is under that umbrella. It's how to engage patient or their family members in the research process. So it's sort of bringing them into the fold. Research has historically been done because somehow scientists and clinicians think we always know best, but we need to make sure that patient views are at the table, and so that's been important. Donna wants to say something. So you want to answer that, Donna?
Sorry, I just wanted to add, I just wanted to clarify actually that we do have people as patient partners with Ovarian Cancer Canada that are not cancer patients themselves. So it can literally be a caregiver, a family member, perhaps people that have lost someone to ovarian cancer. So it's really just who is interested in having an education and being involved in advocating. Anyone who's had an experience or been impacted by ovarian cancer could potentially be a contributor to a research team.
And on that note too, I know that we did have a couple questions just about Alicia's email, or the email that Barb had mentioned in her presentation. And I think it's been put in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. So you should be able to find that email there now. So I think we just have time for one more question. And Barb, again, this one's for you. I've heard that there are challenges when trying to take a drug from the bench to the bedside. What does that mean exactly? And does the OvCAN project help with this?
Absolutely. That is actually the exact place where OvCAN fits, because the discoveries made in the lab and the clinical trials have historically been on opposite ends of the pipeline. And getting that transition between the lab and the clinical trial has been that big hurdle. Trying to get the money to do the preclinical testing has been very, very difficult. So that is why everyone, when we said, where can we have our impact? It was get these good discoveries into clinical trials. And so that pipeline is being filled by projects that are funded by OvCAN. So this bench to bedside is everything that OvCAN is all about. Nicely, I'm glad you brought that up. It's a term I try not to use too often, but it's exactly what we're trying to achieve.
Excellent. So we don't have time for any more questions. We did have quite a few questions that we didn't get to. I did speak with Barb in the chat there, and we are going to do our best to answer those questions and get back to you with some answers on those. I just want to say thank you to Elisabeth, Donna, and Barb for that inspiring session. I think that was the perfect way to start the day. It just makes me so hopeful to hear, first of all, your passion and how passionate you are about it, but about all the work that you're doing and the results that have come and that will continue to come from the work that you and your team are doing. And Donna, to you, you're so passionate about it, and I was emotional listening to you as well. And just how important and impactful it is to have patients involved in this work. So thank you for your voice, and thank you all for the presentation today. Now I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to tell you about one of the other great resources that Ovarian Cancer Canada has for women living with ovarian cancer. OvDialogue is an active and vibrant online community where people living with ovarian cancer can go to connect, to share information, share their experiences, and I think most importantly, they can go to provide support for one another and encouragement for one another. I know that it can be challenging to find support. I live in the province of Saskatchewan, which is largely a rural province, and sometimes there isn't always an in-person support group available, or like now in a pandemic when we can't meet in person. So that's what OvDialogue does. It allows women living with this disease to connect with each other anytime, any day, from anywhere across this country where you are, as long as you have an internet service. It bridges the distance between people in order to create a space for women living with ovarian cancer to exchange their insights and, again, to learn from one another's experiences. Now I'm going to introduce you to Trista. Trista is an active OvDialogue user, and she's happy to share her experiences with the platform with you this morning. Here's Trista.
Hello, and welcome everyone today.
Hi, my name's Trista, and I want to talk to you today about my experience with the online community known as OvDialogue. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2016 when I was 31 years old. I would say what I found most helpful from OvDialogue is the fact that I know that I'm no longer alone in what I'm going through. It's a safe spot where I can go online any time of the day and read through messages or post my own messages about anything related to ovarian cancer. I was lucky enough to have a variety of support groups while I was going through treatment, and I found OvDialogue after I had finished treatment. And as a lot of us know, after treatment, the real journey begins, and it's very challenging. So I found OvDialogue helpful in helping me to navigate through that journey post-treatment, post-diagnosis, and it's a place of encouragement and support on the good days and bad days. It's an opportunity for me to vent about something that might be going on related to ovarian cancer, where I have a lot of great family and friends that I can talk to, but they just don't get it. These are women that are going through the exact same diagnosis or similar diagnosis, might be a similar treatment, and they're able to offer their own advice and opinions. I've seen many different topics on the site, such as worries about reoccurrence, things about survivor guilt, menopause, hormone treatment, genetics, anything you can think of. There's topics on the message board that other women can read. So I would really encourage you to check out that resource. It's motivating to see that there's other strong and brave women on there that are willing to support other women. And I'm a big believer of you need to make your mess your message. So now that I'm through treatment and I'm doing well, I'm using this opportunity to give back on OV Dialogue for other women that are newly diagnosed or looking for support on the site. I'm able to kind of give back to those women that originally gave me support. Again, it's an online community where you can go on any time of the day, and you can access it anywhere from as long as you have an internet connection. So it's very accessible. And it's a trustworthy source of information. There's a lot of information out there, especially when you first get diagnosed. So I really have enjoyed knowing that these are women that get it, that have been through it, and are willing to support me along the journey. And now I've been able to do the same for other women. So I would encourage you to check out OV Dialogue. It's available at ovdialogue.ovariancanada.org.
Thank you, Trista, for sharing that experience with us. And I love your message there, make your mess your message. I love that. So thank you. Just wanted to give you a quick reminder before we head into the next session that we do now have 2 sessions that will be running simultaneously. We have one session that will be specific for caregivers and partners, and our other session will be The Mysteries of Menopause with Dr. Michelle Jacobson, and In It Together, Relationships in Ovarian Cancer with Dr. Ann Katz. So both excellent sessions. Thank you and enjoy.